For 25 years, on one stretch of coast road in southwest Scotland, people went out on ordinary errands and never arrived. A packman walking his route between villages, a farmer and his wife riding home from market, travelers, tinkers, families, they set out in daylight, on a known road, in a settled country, and the road simply kept them. No bodies, no wreckage, no witnesses, just a slowly compounding arithmetic of the missing, year over year, along one particular run of cliffs between Girvan and Ballantry, until the region understood that it had a haunted road and began to route around its own coastline. And here is the part of this story I need you to carry, because it is the part everyone forgets, and it is the most human thing in it. The people of that coast did not do nothing. They did what frightened communities always do. They found somebody to blame. Suspicion fell where suspicion falls, on the last people known to have seen the missing alive. Innkeepers, keepers of lonely taverns, where a traveler was last served, last seen, last warm. Several of them, over the years, were seized, accused, and hanged for murders they had nothing to do with. Innocent men executed by their own terrified neighbors, because the truth was hiding somewhere no one thought to look, and fear must eat something. Imagine being the innkeeper's family. Your father kept a warm room on a cold road, fed strangers for 30 years, and one autumn the town's grief needed a face, and it chose his, and you stood in the crowd at his hanging knowing two things at once: that he was innocent, and that the disappearances would continue, and that when they did, nobody in that crowd would come to your door to apologize, because admitting the rope was wrong would mean the thing on the road was still out there, and the town could not afford to know that. Hold those innkeepers, weigh them, because everything else in this story is going to turn out to be more complicated than it looks, but they never do. In every version ever told, the wrongly hanged stay hanged. The truth, said the story that Scotland would eventually tell, was not on the road at all. It was below it, in a cave at Bennin Head, a sea cave whose mouth drowned twice a day with the tide, running 200 yards into the dark. And what lived in that cave was not a ghost and not a beast. It was a family. This is the story of the most feared cannibal bloodline in history. And then, because this channel owes you the truth, it is the story of where that bloodline actually came from. I'll tell you now. The second story is darker. This is the story of Sawney Bean. The legend begins, as the old accounts tell it, in East Lothian, on the other side of Scotland, in the 1500s, with a boy born to a ditch digger and hedge trimmer, Alexander Bean, Sawney, in the diminutive. His father dug ditches and trimmed hedges for a living, honest bottom-rung work, and the son was raised to it, and the son would not do it. The accounts are blunt on this point. He was idle, he was vicious, and he understood early that he did not intend to spend a life breaking his back on other men's land for other men's coin. He left, and he did not leave alone. He took up with a woman the tradition names Black Agnes Douglas, and the tradition gives her a reputation of her own. She was said to share his inclinations, and in some tellings she had already been accused of witchcraft in her own parish, which in that century was a step from the fire. Two people, in other words, with no place in the world they'd been born into, and no intention of earning one. So they walked out of the world. Understand that in the 1500s, this was actually possible. Scotland's population was thin, its coasts were wild, and between the parishes ran miles of country no one owned in any way that mattered. Sawney Bean and Agnes Douglas crossed the country and disappeared into it, and where they stopped was the Ayrshire coast, at Bennin Head, at the cave. Picture the cave, because the whole legend lives in its architecture. A mouth in the cliffs opening onto the sea, flooded at every high tide, so that for hours of every day, the entrance simply did not exist. Beyond the mouth, passages running back into the headland, by the old accounts more than 200 yards, into chambers of absolute dark, dry above the tide line, invisible from land and sea alike. a house with a door that the ocean locked twice a day. They moved in, and they solved the problem of living the way the legend's whole horror is built on. They robbed travelers on the coast road above, and because a robbery victim who reaches the next village brings the law back with him, they left no victims. And because the cave had no fields, no stock, and no market, and because two outcasts could not spend stolen coin in towns where strangers were remembered, the bodies of the robbed became something else: provision. I'm going to say this part once, at the level the legend says it, and move on. The family that grew in that cave ate the people they killed. The old accounts describe the larder in the deep chambers, the limbs salted and smoked against the winter, like any coastal household's fish. And they describe the one mistake of method that would eventually matter, which is that what a cave stores, a tide can steal. Down the years, remains washed up on the beaches of that coast, and the people who found them learned that their missing were dead, and learned nothing else at all. The sea handed back the evidence of the crime, while erasing every path to the criminals, and the terror of that coastline curdled another degree, and somewhere another innkeeper's rope was measured. And one more detail from the cave's economy, small and perfect, that the old tellings loved. The robbery half of the operation produced coin, rings, buckles, blades, the portable wealth of a generation of travelers, and the family could spend none of it, ever. A stranger with money is remembered in every town in Scotland, and being remembered was the one thing the cave could not survive. So the wealth simply accumulated, heap by heap, in the dark chambers, decade over decade, the most useless treasure in Britain, gold that existed only as a ledger of the dead. The legend's tellers understood exactly what they were building with that image. A family that had walked out of the world so completely that even its greed had nowhere to go. They did not rob for wealth, in the end. The robbery was ritual. The road provided, and what it provided that mattered went to the larder, and the gold was just what was left over, like bones. And in the cave, the family grew. Here is where the legend becomes the thing the title of this video promises, because Sonny Bean's true monstrousness in the story was never his appetite. It was his patience. He and Agnes had children, 8 sons and 6 daughters, born in the cave, raised in the cave, schooled in exactly 2 trades, and when those children came of age, there was no world for them to marry into, because the family's entire existence depended on the world not knowing it existed. So the family did what the legend's tellers clearly understood would horrify their audience, beyond even the eating. It married itself, the sons to the daughters, and the next generation came, 18 grandsons and 14 granddaughters, by the fullest count, none of whom had ever seen a village, a church, a plowed field, or a stranger's face that lived to see theirs. 48 people, 1 bloodline, 1 cave, 3 generations deep before the outside world so much as suspected a family was there. Think about what the children of that cave were, because the legend's cruelest idea is hiding here. The grandchildren were not wicked people who chose a wicked life. They were born into the only world they would ever know, a world 200 yards long, lit by fire, provisioned by the road above, and they were raised in it by every adult they had ever met, and taught that the creatures walking the cliff path were what supper was before it was supper. The legend gives Sonny Bean a choice and gives his grandchildren none. He walked out of the world. They never got one. The operation the clan ran, by the accounts, was disciplined for decades. They struck at dusk and at night. They took single travelers and small parties, never groups large enough to fight or scatter. They learned that flight was the great danger, that one survivor equals the end of everything, and so they worked in numbers, cutting off retreat before showing themselves. And the coast, above them, lived for a generation inside a fear it could not name. The old accounts and the later tellings agree on the texture of it. Travelers on that road reported the feeling of being watched from the rocks. Families stopped sending anyone alone. Traffic bent inland, adding miles to every journey, and the ends of the coast road withered, which is its own bitter joke, because the innkeepers that fear didn't hang, fear bankrupted. A quarter century is long enough for dread to become architecture. Children were born, raised, and married on that coast who had never once known the shore road as anything but the place people don't come back from. 25 years, as many as 1,000 people, says the fullest version, fed into that cave, while the coast above hanged its innkeepers and told itself stories about the devil. 1,000. Hold the number loosely. We're going to come back and weigh it properly, and when we do, it's going to break the whole story open. Because every legend of a perfect predator needs the night it stops being perfect. And this one has a date, a fair, and a fight on the coast road. Quick one while the fair ends, and it pays off at the finish. Every region on Earth has one of these. The local monster, the name parents used, the thing in the woods or the cave or the lake near where you grew up. Comment yours, the name and where you're from. Trust me, tonight of all nights, you want yours on the record. Okay. The road at dusk. A man and his wife riding home from a fair at dusk on the coast road, both on one horse in some tellings, in others two. It doesn't matter. What matters is that the clan had watched the fair traffic all day and chosen its moment, and the ambush came the way it had come 1,000 times, from both sides, cutting the road ahead and behind. And this time it went wrong, because the man was armed, and the man could fight. The accounts describe a horseman with sword and pistol laying about him in the half-dark, riding down his attackers, refusing to be pulled from the saddle. His wife was not so lucky. She was dragged down, and she died there on the road, quickly, at their hands, in front of him. And the legend does not spare him the sight, and I will spare you the details it gives. He fought on over her body because there was nothing else left to do. And then the road filled with light and noise. A crowd of fairgoers, 20 and 30 strong, coming home behind them, torches and voices. And the clan did the thing it had spent 25 years making sure it never had to do. It let one go. The family melted back over the cliffs, and the horseman stood in the torchlight over his wife, alive, seen and believed. The first survivor in a generation, the coast's quarter-century of hauntings, collapsed overnight into a single comprehensible fact. There are men out there, on the road, in numbers. Word went, says the legend, to the king himself, James VI of Scotland, and the king came in person, 400 men, the accounts say, with horses and arms and, decisively, bloodhounds. The searchers walked the coast the way searchers had walked it for years, past the mouth of the cave at Benin Head, seeing what everyone had always seen, a flooded slot in the rocks where nothing could live. The dogs stopped at the mouth and would not leave it. The dogs went mad at it. Whatever 400 men could not see, the hounds could smell, and it was coming from inside the cliff. They waited out the tide and went in with torches. 200 yards, chamber by chamber, and in the deep rooms they found the family, all 48, and they found the wealth of 25 years of the road, coins and rings and clothing and weapons of the dead heaped in the dark. And they found the larder. I told you I'd say it once, and I already have. The men of that party understood, standing in it, every disappearance of their lifetimes at once. The clan was taken alive, the accounts say all of them, and marched to Edinburgh. And here the legend does something that most retellings race past, and this channel will not, because it is the legend's own tell. There was no trial, not a hearing, not a magistrate, nothing. The story says the crimes were judged too monstrous for process, and the entire bloodline was executed at Leith without any law touching the case. The men one way, the women another, and both ways were made slow and public and terrible, and the crowd watched a family die to the last child of the cave, some of whom, remember what you're being asked to cheer for, had been born into that dark and taught the world by monsters, and had never once chosen anything. The party that came out of that cave, the tellings say, came out changed, and the legend spends a moment on them that I'll honor, because it's the story's one flicker of mercy. Hardened soldiers of the crown, men of a brutal century, and the accounts describe them emerging white and silent, some sick, none willing afterward to speak of the deep rooms, except on oath. The legend knew what it was doing there too. It is not enough for a monster to be destroyed. Somebody respectable has to see it first and carry it out into the daylight in their face so the whole country can read it there. That is the end of the legend. The road went quiet. The coast healed. Scotland had looked into its own cliffs and burned out what it found, and the story of Sawney Bean settled into the nation's memory as its darkest true tale, told for 3 centuries, printed and reprinted, whispered to children, stamped onto the tourist trail where you can walk into the cave at Benin Head today, tide permitting, and stand in the dark where it happened. Except, now I'm going to tell you the truth about this story, and I promised you at the start that the truth is darker, and I keep my promises. 10 seconds first, because past this point, the video becomes a different video. 1 word in the comments. The word is cave. If you type it before the next section, you typed it believing one thing about this story, and everyone who types it after will mean something else entirely, and the comment section will hold both crowds forever. Go. Okay, the floor dropping. There is no record of any of it. I want to be precise about what I mean, because this is a channel that reads archives, and Scotland's archives, for exactly the period in question, are good. Parish records, burgh records, court records, and the Scottish courts of that era wrote everything down. Diaries, letters, Kirk session minutes, the correspondence of a literate age, and in all of it, across the 15 and 1600s, there is nothing. No wave of disappearances on the Ayrshire coast, no hanged innkeepers, no royal expedition, and a king riding out with 400 men is not an event that goes unrecorded. King's movements were logged daily. No mass execution at Leith, in a country that documented its executions meticulously. No Bean, no cave, no clan, not one contemporary line anywhere ever found, and people have looked hard. And the story's own numbers testify against it. Researchers have done the grim arithmetic. 48 people cannot eat 1,000 victims in 25 years as their food supply. Scaled properly, a predation that could feed that cave would have visibly depopulated southwest Scotland, collapsed its markets, emptied its parishes, and screamed from every record of the region. The legend describes a famine-scale event that no one at the time noticed, because there was nothing to notice, and I can make the silence sharper, because you have to understand what Scottish records of that exact era did find room for. This is the great age of the Scottish witch panics. Between the 1560s and the end of the 1600s, Scotland investigated thousands of witchcraft accusations and wrote them down. Names, parishes, interrogations, verdicts, executions, in records so complete that modern researchers have built searchable databases of the accused. The Scottish state of this period was one of the most enthusiastic documenters of monstrosity in European history. It logged the devil's supposed dealings with village widows in triplicate, and you are asked to believe that this same apparatus watched a king personally lead 400 men and a pack of hounds against a 48-member clan of incestuous cannibals, march them through the country, and execute every last one at Leith without trial, and wrote down nothing. Not a line. The state that recorded 4,000 witches missed the cannibal dynasty. There is only one explanation that survives contact with that comparison. So where does the story actually first appear? Not in Scotland, not in the 1500s, in London, in print. In 1704 und 30, the earliest known telling sits in a sensational crime anthology published under the name Captain Charles Johnson, a catalogue of highwaymen and murderers for the entertainment of English readers, and some scholars believe the pen behind that name was Daniel Defoe himself, the inventor of the modern novel, one of the fathers of English fiction. From there, the tale was carried into the Newgate Calendar, the era's best-selling library of monsters, and out through decades of cheap chapbooks into the permanent furniture of British horror. 200 years after it supposedly happened, 400 miles from the cave, in the fiction industry. And now the detail that closes the case, the one hiding in plain sight in the monster's own name. In 18th century England, Sawney was not a name, it was a slur. It was the standard derogatory English nickname for a Scotsman, the stock figure of 100 cruel cartoons and pamphlets, the way other slurs have served against other peoples. An English reader of 1734, picking up this story, did not hear a man called Alexander Bean. They heard the equivalent of a headline reading, roughly, "The Scot Who Eats People." Now put the publication date in its century. The Act of Union had bound Scotland to England in 1707, bitterly contested. The Jacobite risings were live, 1715 behind, 1745 ahead, Scottish clans in arms against London, and English presses, through those exact decades, ran hot with propaganda painting the Scots, especially the clans, as savages, primitives, barbarians in skirts, a people who needed civilizing by force. Historians like Dr. Louise Yeoman have said it plainly, a story in which a Scottish clan, that word, clan, doing exactly this work, lives in a hole, breeds with itself, and literally devours civilized travelers, is that propaganda with a plot. The most feared cannibal bloodline in history was not bred in a cave at Benane Head. It was typeset in London. Honesty requires the counter-argument, so here it is. Some scholars, like Sean Thomas, push back. The same publications monstered English criminals just as gleefully, so why read anti-Scottish intent into this one? It's a fair point, and you should hold it. But notice what England's press gave its own villains. It gave England Dick Turpin, the highwayman, and made him dashing, romantic, a legend children played at being. England got a swashbuckler. Scotland got a hole full of incest and human meat, named with a slur. Weigh those two gifts yourself. And one more root, older and sadder, because legends are never built from nothing. Scotland already had a cannibal story of its own, centuries older, and it was about hunger. Christie Cleek, they called him, Andrew Christie of Perth, a figure from the famine years of the 1300s, a starving man in a starving band in a starving country, said to have taken travelers with an iron hook and eaten because there was nothing else. Scottish mothers said his name to children for centuries. Somebody assembling a Scottish cannibal for London readers had that old bone to build on. They took a famine ghost, born of real hunger, fattened him into a dynasty of appetite, moved him to a cave, gave him a slur for a name, and sold him back to the world as Scotland's true face. So the title of this video promised you the dark origins of history's most feared cannibal bloodline, and now you can see both origins whole and judge which is darker. The first origin is the one the legend claims. East Lothian, a lazy tanner's son, a witch, a cave, the 1500s. That origin never happened. The second origin is a printing press in London in 1734. In a century of propaganda, a monster assembled out of an old famine ghost and a slur aimed at a nation. That one happened. It is documented. You have seen the document's names in this video. And here is the thing about the second origin. The legend says the Bean bloodline was exterminated at Leith to the last child. But the real bloodline, the one born in 1734, was never caught and never stopped breeding. Count its descendants, 3 centuries of chapbooks and penny dreadfuls, the horror tradition of 2 continents. When Wes Craven sat down to write The Hills Have Eyes, the founding text of the feral cannibal family film, he built it, by his own account, directly on Sawney Bean. And that film fathered a genre, and that genre is with you tonight on every streaming service, every degenerate clan in every cave and desert and backwoods of modern horror, every movie that ever taught you to fear the rural poor. Trace the family tree of the fiction. and it is the healthiest bloodline in horror. The Hills Have Eyes, and its sequels and remakes. The Texas Backwoods Clans, the Wrong Turn Mountain Families, the mutant kin of 100 films, the feral households of video games and paperbacks, every one of them carrying the recognizable genome, isolation, inbreeding, appetite, a cave or a farmhouse, or a holler at the end of a road decent people shouldn't have taken. 3 generations deep in the cave, the legend said. The fiction is 10 generations deep and breeding faster than ever. That is the Bean bloodline. It lives in scripts now instead of caves, and it eats the same thing it always ate, which was never people. Reputations, whole regions, whole peoples. It taught the world a reflex, that isolation breeds monsters, that the poor family at the end of the bad road is degenerating into something you should fear. If you watch this channel's video about a real family in West Virginia, you have seen that reflex feeding in the present tense with a camera. The most feared cannibal bloodline in history never ate a single human being. It has been eating people's names for 300 years, and it is still hungry, and we are its cave. And Scotland, in the end, did the most Scottish thing imaginable with the slander, which deserves its minute. It took the monster back. From the late 1800s on, Scottish writers picked up the English libel and retold it as their own dark treasure, and today Sawney Bean is a jewel of the Edinburgh Ghost Tour circuit, a fixture of the dungeon attractions, a point of gruesome national pride. The cave at Bennon Head gets pilgrims every summer, tide permitting. A story built to shame a nation became that nation's favorite campfire, which tells you the deepest thing this channel knows about legends. You cannot kill one. You can only decide who owns it. And Scotland, given a monster wearing a slur for a name, shrugged, adopted him, and started charging admission. There is a kind of victory in that. There is also, if you stand at the cave mouth at low tide with the tourists, a kind of echo of the oldest problem, because every one of us down there came up the road to look at the poor family in the hole. The reflex survives even the debunking, especially the debunking. So, the payoffs. Earlier you commented your local monster, the legend from your region, and the comment section is full of them now, from every country watching. Here is your assignment, and it's the whole video in one errand. Pick your monster, and go find out when it was first written down, and by whom, and who it made look like a savage. Some of your monsters will turn out to be real crimes. But I promise you, a good number of you are going to find a printing press, a political moment, and somebody's neighbor getting monstered. And once you've done that autopsy on your own legend once, you will never hear the phrase, based on a true story, the same way again. And the word you typed at the halfway mark, cave. Everyone who typed it before part 4 meant the hole in the cliff at Bennon Head. Everyone typing it now knows the real cave was made of paper, and that the tide that hit its mouth was 300 years of people wanting the story to be true. Both crowds are down there in the comments together. That's this whole channel, in one word, typed twice. The innkeepers stay hanged, by the way. In every version, even the fictional one, the community's fear kills the innocent before the monster is ever found. The legend invented the cannibals. It didn't have to invent that part. That part, humanity supplies free every single time, and it is the one detail in the story of Sawney Bean that I believe completely. If you carried this one to the end, you know what this channel is. Subscribe, leave your monster below, and I'll see you on the next one.